before we get into this week's episode, I want to say thank you to everyone who has supported this show, either as a guest or as a listener. I really cannot thank you enough for your time and your support so far. I'm really enjoying making this show, and I hope I can continue to amplify Black voices and spread joy with this show across the interwebs. One other way you can support this podcast and increase its visibility is by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and also be sure to smash that subscribe button, as the kids say. And lastly, I have a new podcast coming out next week called Roswell High, where each week me and my husband Sam will discuss the television series Roswell, New Mexico, while getting stoned. So if you like the Roswell franchise, or you just want to hear a couple of potheads talk about aliens as metaphors for social injustice, check out the show starting next week. And I'll have links and more info at standingwhileblack.com once we launch this other project. So stay tuned, and enough of me blabbing. Let's get back to my regular ranting with this week's guest, Morgan Brooks. Thank you so much for listening. You're awesome. And now let's get on with the show. Coming up on this week's episode of Standing While Black.
It's the same feeling for this kind of Batman situation, where if I become a multi-billionaire and I get a Batman suit, no one's going to freak out.
This is Standing While Black, a weekly podcast discussing Black experiences and fandom. I'm your host, Ashley Briggs, and thank you for checking out the show. For decades, many comic book fans have connected with the story of Bruce Wayne, as well as the Batfam of engaging characters who orbit around him. But what draws us into the legend of Batman, an orphan who grows up to become a wealthy and complex crime fighter? And what does the future hold for this iconic protagonist? This week, I had a great conversation with writer, podcaster, and comic collector Morgan Brooks. You can listen to Morgan and the Ren Boys talk about all things nerd culture on their podcast called Ren Pod, anywhere you get your podcasts. Please enjoy our chat about comics, blerd life, and being true to yourself. Let's get into it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Morgan. How's your week going so far?
It's going fairly well. How's yours?
Good. It's extremely humid here where I am in Arizona, which I'm not used to yet. So we're having monsoon season, so a lot of rain in the desert. It's very steamy. Could be better. I kind of miss the heat. What part? I guess, where are you located? I forgot to ask.
So that's a complicated question. So I'm from New York, but right now I live in the South, so it's actually extremely hot here as well.
Right. Oh yeah, I used to live in Tennessee, so I know the South as well. And I'm originally from Ohio. I've moved around a lot, so if you give me a climate, I've lived in it.
Oh
So
yeah.
everything is entirely too hot right now. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This week we're going to be talking about comic books. Specifically, I have some Batman questions, but also some general fandom questions. My first question for you is, how did you initially get into comic books as a reader?
So my uncle was a pretty big comic book reader when he was younger, when he was like maybe 16 or 17, back in like the 80s. So he had collected quite a few like Batman comics and things like that. And then when I hit maybe 5 and I was really reading, and I really liked the like graphics and the comic books and everything, my uncle went and bought me a couple. And like, I'm a writer now, which is wild. But like when I was a kid, like that's kind of how I got into writing as well. It was like my mom used to read to me, and then she would have me read to her, and then comic books kind of became this thing that I could share with certain members of my family, and that's kind of how I got into it.
Awesome. Do you remember the first comic book that you purchased yourself?
The first one I purchased myself. Oh my gosh. Okay. I believe it was Uncanny X-Men, um, issue number 70 or something like that. For people who are listening who might know Uncanny X-Men, it's the one where Nightcrawler comes back to life from heaven.
Hmm.
Because he needs to save the rest of the X-Men, and I was a very big Nightcrawler fan at the time, and I was in Midtown Comics looking through all the stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Let me buy that."
I was always, I mean, I liked Nightcrawler. I was a Jubilee fan myself back then,
Oh
back as a
yeah.
kid. And, but I don't think I bought any X-Men comics when I was a kid. I think the first comic I ever bought was a Ren and Stimpy comic. I was really into the show, and then just happened my stepbrother, he collected X-Men comics, but when I would go shopping with him I ended up getting more kind of cartoonish and I would say grotesque with Ren and Stimpy uh, works. So would you say that you have a collection? Do you collect? Is that something you're into?
I do. I do have a collection. It at the moment it consists of like maybe 30 or 40 DC comics, maybe 70 or 80 Marvel comics, several like trade like collectible paperbacks from the mid 70s and 80s, and like two DC encyclopedias.
Now, more specifically, going into sort of the Batman specific franchise, what would you say, as a fan, what sets Batman apart from other superhero characters?
The ooh, okay, this is great. Okay, the main thing that sets Batman apart from other characters is it's his family, right? Like you have brooding characters all over the place. You have the Punisher, you have Daredevil, you have Spider-Man. Sometimes you have unbeatable characters as well. You have Superman, you have Goku, you have all these other characters. But what sets Batman apart and what makes him unique is his family and his family dynamic with not just his children or with Alfred or with any of these other heroes, but also with the Justice League and just kind of any team he's on and any team his children is on. It kind of spreads to that like family dynamic that really separates him apart.
Mm, great answer. Okay, there are, obviously, we all know there are a lot of Batman adaptations as far as film and television. Do you have, what would you say has been for you the best adaptation that you've seen?
Ooh, okay. For Batman by himself, because there's two different answers for this. Oh, so so for Batman by himself, the best adaptation is realistically the Batman animated series
Hmm.
from the '90s. It encapsulates everything that is kind of modern day Batman with the Robins, with the villains, all these types of things. And then with the Bat family, there's a Lego film called Batman Family Matters, which I will always recommend anybody to watch if they love the Bat family because it's
uh
good family times, busting crimes, just having a good time.
Oh, that's great. I actually took my kids to Legoland, and so we've gone back to rewatch the Lego movies, just kind of associate the amusement park with the films and kind of connect the dots there. And so that's a great recommendation because we haven't watched that yet. So thank you. That gives me
Yeah.
something to share with them. I heard that there's a new series, the next Batman, and it has Tim Fox as playing, or not playing. That's the character's name. So it has Tim Fox, the first Black Batman. If there were to be a film adaptation, who would you cast as Tim Fox?
I'm not gonna say myself. I so badly want to say me, but I'm not.
So put me in the game. Like,
Legitimately, the I don't know his name, but the kid who plays Patriot in Falcon and Winter Soldier,
hmm.
I think he would be an amazing Tim Fox, or even on the show Titans, they've just introduced Tim Drake as African American now, so that kid has a great look for Batman as well.
And I guess, what were your initial reactions or feelings about this change in the franchise with Tim Fox being the next Batman?
So I'm one of those. Of course, I'm excited. because we don't get a lot of superheroes in general when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to like representation for us. In like a positive light or whatever, because sometimes it skews in either way. Um, but to have something this major is pretty exciting, all things considered. Like, I know there's going to be fanboys who are mad about it. I know there's going to be, arguments on Twitter. I'm probably going to get in arguments on Twitter about it, but
You're gonna read some think pieces, and everyone's suddenly gonna be this commentary specialist about it, of course.
exactly, yeah, everybody's going to be an expert on Batman overnight all of a sudden. And but I'm super excited because it's like, oh yeah, we're like, for the longest time, I've grown up reading comic books, and it's almost how I felt when Miles Morales became Spider-Man
Mm-hmm.
in way back, I don't know, 2014, something like that. When they first introduced that, I was probably the most excited I've ever been in my life, because I spent my entire youth reading about Spider-Man and Batman, and to see one of those characters become black and Puerto Rican was insane to me. And I was like, this is the greatest day of my life. Like, I don't care who says whatever, this is amazing. I could be Spider-Man. Of course I can't, I wasn't bitten by a spider, but
But if it happened, there's a chance.
exactly. But if it happened, nobody would say much, because finally there's a Spider-Man that looks like me. So it's the same feeling for this kind of Batman situation, where if I become a multi-billionaire and I get a Batman suit, no one's gonna freak out.
Now, I always have this debate with my husband about when it comes to superheroes and Batman specifically. Uh, and we're obviously not the first ones to have these conversations, but with Batman and, like you said, being a billionaire, having money and resources to become a superhero versus Superman or other characters and the kind of born with that power, what is most compelling about his origin story for you as a fan?
Ooh, okay. See, I'm in the camp of people who I will definitely say any day of the week that Batman is not a hero, for the simple fact that he is a billionaire, right? And he doesn't do enough in my mentality. If you're so adamant about fixing Gotham, punching mentally ill people is not the way to go about it, Bruce.
Exactly. So many other paths to follow before we get there. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. You know, healthcare reform,
Mhm.
education. Like, there's so many. Gotham has an unemployment problem. Handle that first, you know. But
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of. I mean, I didn't read the comics, but with Black Panther and just thinking of the film, and I left the theater just thinking about like, well, there's so much more that could be done to actually help people, and you have all this money and vibranium, and like just do more, not just build one little community center in one place. Like, there's so much more that can be done, but at the same time, we have, it's one step at a time. So I always see a lot of similarities, personally, between Batman and Black Panther, um, just in their choices of how they make change, but then how they limit themselves as their storylines go on. Now, when it comes to Batman specifically and
Mhm.
his struggles and the different storylines in the franchise, and this could be for the comic or the films, any way you want to interpret this question, but who was the most compelling Batman villain or antagonist to you?
ooh, it's actually the Penguin. I think would
Mhm.
be the most compelling, especially in the comics, because like most people will say the Joker. They are wrong. They're
Tell it like it is, right?
yeah. Like, the Penguin he's almost like Bruce's antithesis, right? Where he was this rich kid who lost everything because of just Gotham City being Gotham City. His parents just lost all their money. They had to leave the city, and he comes back 20 years later as a young man who is now trying to work his way back up into that upper crust society that he remembers, but didn't get to partake in as an adult because hardships befell his family. And of course that leads him to a life of crime and all this type of stuff, and run-ins in with Batman. But over time, the Penguin becomes a legitimate businessman and owns the Iceberg Lounge and begins to employ people from Gotham in a better way than Bruce Wayne does, and even tends to start reorganizing and revitalizing the poorer neighborhoods of the city, and it really leads to like a much more complex character of like, well, he's not
Mm-hmm.
just a villain, he's also this like person who's trying to do something good, and he's just wrong about it most of the time.
Right. I always think those are the best villains in fiction when they really believe that what they're doing is the right thing. They are trying to do good. It just doesn't actually it's either executed poorly or it doesn't come across that way to the rest of the world, but they really in their hearts think, this is it. This I'm the hero here. It's a
Yes.
lot more fun than just a muhaha Dr. Evil type of character. Um, I do want to get back into your personal experiences as a fan with the Batfam and the Batman fandom. What makes that fandom feel like a special community for you?
So I think mainly it's the Robins for the Bat like fandom, because you can find yourself in one of any of them. There's one for everybody. If you're a
Hmm.
happy-go-lucky person who has a lot of anger issues, Dick Grayson's right there for you. The classic original. If you're somebody who feels like they're burnt out, grew up as this kid who was gifted or whatever, then Tim Drake is right there. If you grew up with a horrible family situation, you might be able to relate to Jason Todd or Stephanie Brown or any of these many conglomerate of orphans that Bruce Wayne has gathered around himself, and kind of being able to see myself in various Robins, and kind of seeing myself in Jason or Tim or any of these characters really drew me in, and was like, oh wow, there's it makes you feel a little bit less alone when you're going through things.
Hmm. Now, in your experience within fandom itself, have you felt represented in the fandom when it comes to either going to any conventions or just being on social media within fandom spaces? Do you feel a part of that community and embraced by it?
It's definitely gotten better in the recent years. I think TikTok definitely, as odd as it is to say that TikTok helped something, um,
Right.
TikTok definitely kind of helped to make a space for African American and POC in general, like fans of the Bat family, because they lift certain characters up, like Cassandra Cain, who's Asian, or Duke Thomas and Luke Fox, who are both African American, and both had their time as Robins or Batwing and things like that. And people really kind of are saying, hey, let's really focus on those characters because they didn't get a fair shake in the comics. Let's talk about them. And it kind of gives that representation that was missing for a very long time.
Hmm. Now, it sounds like that is sort of an evolution of the fandom. Were there any struggles for you when you were younger, as just a comic book fan in general, or was that taken as something to praise in school, as opposed to maybe not? Any experiences you want to share with us, with fellow comic kids out here?
Okay. Yeah. It was definitely difficult in probably when I got to high school. When I had a bit of a different experience when I was younger, pre high school, because I went to a predominantly black school. So everybody kind of was it was all people like us. So so there was those of us who did read comic books. We all kind of understood each other, and was able to make a space for each other. And our main problem was just, comic books weren't as popular back then because it was
Hmm.
pre MCU and all this type of stuff. So our main issue was like people being like, I'm going to shove you in a locker because you like comic books.
Hmm.
Uh, then when I got to high school, I went to a predominantly white high school. So I was one of maybe 20 black kids in my high school. So when it came to that, there was this stigma of what we were kind of supposed to be, in a way. Like, we were expected to play sports and expected to do all these types of things, and I wasn't that kid.
Hmm.
Like I enjoyed reading comic books, I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed theater, I enjoyed like all these things that traditionally weren't what most people thought of as traditionally like African American athlete, that type of stuff.
Hmm.
And so there was an issue, of course, with people who at the time I thought were my friends, when I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to this comic convention in New York. I'm going to go to XYZ. I'm excited to try and get tickets to Comic Con in San Diego. And they'd be like, really? But there's like a basketball game or something, it'd be things like that. We're very kind of microaggression-y and very
Right.
like
Oh, yeah.
passive aggressive.
Right. Well, I think it definitely takes a sort of courage to, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but like to just be ourselves, especially when we were younger, and just kind of finding those sources of happiness or distraction or comfort in fandom and in fandom experiences, and that not being seen as black or black enough. And I'm a 5'11" nerdy looking black girl who also did theater and was into things that like and went to predominantly black schools up until college, and so I didn't really experience kind of being the minority or the token until college. But before that, it was like, oh, there's that theater girl who's got her face in books, and I don't know what she's doing, but we're going to the basketball game, and also, and then the adults would be like, okay, you should go play basketball. You're tall, you're black, just do it. I'm like, I can't dribble. Like, leave me alone. I'm just trying. I'm trying to enjoy writing some fanfic over here. So I think it does take. It's taken me having my own kids and getting older and being in my 30s now to really embrace that difference and see like, okay, even as a kid, I was like, well, I am who I am, and you're just gonna have to put up with it. And I think that takes bravery to be able to continue enjoying what you enjoy and just kind of learning to cut out the noise of criticism from our peers or family members who don't get it, and finding the people who do understand why these things are important because it matters to us as fans. So
Yeah.
kudos to younger you.
Yeah, younger me had it rough with I loved punk music as well, and that
Mhm.
was coming around a cookout with your My Chemical Romance t-shirt and
Right.
and
I played My Chemical Romance for my dad, who is definitely a different generation, in his car once, and he just looked at me like, "What is this?" So
Yup.
it's like, I just want to share my love. Oh, sorry, you don't get it. All right. I guess with more social media and more connection with other people, it's so much easier to find like-minded people now outside of like in real life circles. It's easier to find online communities to fan out with. Have you had positive, would you say, have you had any positive or negative experiences with fan experiences online outside of TikTok? I don't know if there's any particular apps you like, but how has your experience of fandom been through social media, especially in the last year or so?
Oh, okay. I'm a very big okay. The two main social medias I use are TikTok and Twitter.
Hmm.
So Twitter, as most people know, is a cesspool of hell.
That's where I live. Yep. Okay.
So I'm on Twitter a lot. So and I'm also a very big fan. Besides just Batman, I'm also a fan of Star Wars as well. So for a long time, there has been a lot of like negative interaction in the Star Wars fandom towards not just towards a lot of POC, but definitely especially towards African Americans with John Boyega. And so that I've had a lot of horrible experiences with that, just arguments with
Hmm.
people about how, because I'm very much of the camp of people who believe that Lucasfilm did do Finn dirty, they did John Boyega dirty, the fans were horrible to him, and I was like, he should have been the main character of the story. They set it up to be that way, and
Right.
then they chickened out once that first trailer dropped, and he took his helmet off, and it was a black guy underneath the helmet, and people started losing their minds.
Yeah.
you
It's
know
like, welcome to, oh God. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a rough time, especially in the last year, because people that I know would bring it up on Twitter, and it would become a number 3 trending topic in the U.S. and like, and then all of a sudden I'm in the middle of this argument again, and people are throwing slurs around and all this type of stuff, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, what is your problem? What is really the issue that you don't that you're like angry that he could have been a Jedi? Why are you so mad?
Right. Did people take it so personally? Like inclusion is somehow, it's like, well, did you think you were going to be in the film? Like, what were you holding out for? We touched on it a little bit in episode 4 of this podcast, and talked about sort of that reluctance to see change, but change is coming. It's coming down the tracks anyway, whether certain people like it or not. So I'm really happy to have heard about the next Batman being Tim Fox, and I hope that in future there are more comic book characters who are Black and people of color, and that we can be included not just on the screen and on the page, but also in those job positions, because that money's for us too. So I want to
Yeah.
see more roles, yeah, for everybody. And lastly, for you personally and your fandom experience and your fandom journey, what life lessons have you learned along the way?
Life lessons I've learned along the way. Number one would be it's okay to sometimes not be kind. Uh,
Ooh, I need to write this down. Okay.
yeah, like everybody will tell you all the time, always be kind. You'll catch more flies with honey or whatever. But sometimes vinegar works. Like some people aren't going to learn unless you just spell it out for them raw and real. And raw and real usually isn't nice. It's not covered up in flowers. And yeah, we seem like the bad guy a lot, but that's an issue that's been going on forever, and we're going to look like the bad guy anyway. So get your point
Hmm.
across and tell them what you got to tell them.
That's so true. Do you have any comic book recommendations that you'd like to add in before we wrap up here?
Yes, I do. I would definitely recommend reading Invincible if because that show recently came out. So if you haven't read the series, it is not. It's good for people over maybe 16. For anybody who would think to showing it to younger people, I'll give a recommendation for something that's safer for younger people. But if you're over 16, it's a pretty good comic. It's got a lot of in-depth storytelling, and it has a television adaptation as well now on Amazon Prime. And if you're younger or if you're any age group really, Spider-Man in the Life. Let me look real fast. It's right next to me.
I'll take your time.
There it is. Spider-Man Life Story it's a great comic book that just kind of covers everything. If you're like new to comic books and you know nothing about it, Spider-Man's a great jumping off point for getting the comics, and it has Spider-Man Life Story, which covers pretty much every Spider-Man major story beat since about the 60s up
Hmm.
until the modern day, and it's told in like this like memoir format that's kind of like an autobiography by Spider-Man.
Awesome recommendations. Get on that, everyone listening. Go read, check them out. And do you want to give any shout outs to anyone listening to this episode?
Yes. So, I'm sure my sister will definitely be listening to this along with my nieces. So, hello. How are you two? How you doing, Riley? How you doing, Vita? How you guys doing?
Oh, Bat fam. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have any general promotions you want to shamelessly plug? Feel free. Anything you have going on, anything you're writing, anything we should look forward to, and also where can we find you?
Yes, okay. For the stuff that I'm working on, I'm actually about to start working on a film project, literally on Saturday. So that's going to be fun. I'm going to be on set
Ooh,
for the first day of the shooting. So that'll come out. Updates will be on Twitter and stuff, and I'm writing music for it and everything and writing scripts. So that's going to be
gonna be
daunting, but
busy. Yeah.
yeah, just a lot to do with that. So updates will be on Twitter, which you can find me on the Twitter at Morgan L. Brooks, and everywhere else pretty much, TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, SoundCloud, all the places. Hidden Time Lord, actually, HIDDENTIMELORD, and that's it.
Awesome. Well, it has been a pleasure speaking with you, Morgan, and best of luck on Saturday starting production. I guess, are you in production or pre-production? Wherever phase you're in for day one. Stay hydrated, and best of luck to you.
Yes, thank you. This was lovely, and I look forward to listening to more episodes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Standing While Black, a weekly podcast discussing Black experiences in fandom. Follow this podcast on all of your favorite streaming apps and visit standingwhileblack.com for show notes and to apply to be a guest on the show. This podcast is written, produced, and hosted by me, Ashley Briggs. Show your support and get early access to new episodes by joining the Standing While Black fandom on Patreon. Let's geek out together.